The wrist bone's connected to the wristwatch. What's up, everyone? It is Wednesday, December 7th, 2016, and I am your host of this podcast, Luke Thomas. This is the Promotional Malpractice Live Chat. Today on the podcast, we are going to get to, of course, UFC 206 is on Saturday. There's also Bellator 168, if you can believe it. And then there is, as well, UFC Fight Night Albany on Friday night. Don't know if I'm going to watch that or not, but we'll see. I mean, I'll watch it eventually. I just mean live. We can get to all those topics, plus anything else you want to get to here on the podcast in the world of mixed martial arts and bad movies and bad food. Best place to do that, of course, is on MMAfighting.com. You can also get at me on Twitter at at SBN Luke Thomas. And you can use the hashtag #ChatRappers. That would be a good place to do that. I've been trying to be better about soda. I haven't had soda in a while, like last weekish. That's a while for me. Got my coffee today. Trying to have the coffee a little bit later in the day, but not too late, so that carries me through. We'll see how that goes. Might be a failed experiment. All right. With that out of the way, appreciate you tuning in. Let's get this show on the road, shall we? And a bunch of you emailed me for questions, and I put them all, not all, I think I put them all, but I put most of them, if not all of them, from the last week anyway, in the comments section. So we'll see how that goes. Let's see. All right. First question. Westworld review. Have you guys been watching Westworld on HBO? I know there's a couple of losers out there panning it, but it's actually a quite good show. You told your listeners on your SiriusXM radio show weekdays, yes, that you'd go over Westworld and your theories on the Monday show. However, your producers hadn't watched Westworld, so you couldn't really talk about it. What are the twists you saw coming, and what was the twist that you didn't see coming? Overall, what grade would you give the Westworld? I'd give it a B+, A-. Probably more on the B+ side, but that's, I'm a stingy grader, so B+ is pretty good. I don't know if I can talk about the twists here either, because I don't know if you donks have seen it yet. Should I just ruin it for everyone? Well, one of them was about the timeline Dolores is on. I was totally right about that one. And then the other one was about who really is the man in black, and I got that right as well. The twist I didn't see was at the end, the very, very end, like the very last scene. I did not quite anticipate some of the contours of that. You want a more focus on my YouTube channel on weekly reviews, TVs, movie, food? I don't know if people really care about that. Someone has a long post here about the Mobius strip and the bicameral theory and things like that. You can check it out. It's probably pretty good, since people are mocking him for it. The vintage Tommy Toehold. Go to 910 of this link. All right, let's see. 910. Oh, yeah, that's when I was sniffling and sneezing. Yes, I remember that. Okay, fantasy matchup. CM Punk versus Floyd Mayweather in MMA. God. God. Does Floyd Mayweather get some time to train? I might actually go CM Punk on that one, only because he's much bigger, but I'd be nervous the whole time. Mark Raimondi versus Ariel Helwani in a BJJ sub only. I think Raimondi trains, so he is certainly outsized, but he might have a little something for him. Would you rather job to CM Punk at WrestleMania? I have no idea what that means. Have Demi and Maya take your back in grappling to the death? This is a terrible question. Would you rather see CM Punk teach you, Romero, how to wrestle, or have Vince McMahon teach you the beauty of pro wrestling? The first, only because it'd be kind of funny. McGregor's contract. Dana said recently on UFC Unfiltered podcast that McGregor's contract is almost up. How likely is it that he doesn't re-sign with the UFC, and do you see him promoting his own fights independently? Well, certainly I do not see him doing that, although couldn't rule it out. Couldn't rule out him developing a management company. Couldn't rule out some kind of carving out allowance to do other things that, and remember Anderson Silva wanted to box Roy Jones Jr. and never could, and things like that. So maybe there might be some kind of carving out of that. But the reality is, and I think McGregor is smart enough to realize this, is that it's true that if you just had a UFC where you put any old person at the top of the bill, it won't do all that well. This is a star-driven sport, and he is, I think at this point, pretty firmly the biggest star. So he realizes that they need him a lot. But the truth is, like, if you could partner with anyone in the space to generate maximum revenue, what would you do? You would do that. It might mean that there's a fundamental change in the way his contract is written or how their arrangement is put together. But and it's not to say he couldn't be successful on his own. He has reached a level where he probably could. But it's not clear who he would fight. It's not clear how that would work, if he'd be even interested in that side of things, if you'd want to front the money. Also, I was told he had signed a new deal just prior to the Aldo fight. I'm not sure. I mean, he says almost up. I'm not sure if that means 2 or 3 more fights or what that means, but I don't think that means it's imminently up, but we'll see. You really want to see Conor McGregor versus some guy out there? I mean, other guys might end up leaving, but it would take a while. It wouldn't happen overnight. The guy's 28. I suppose if there was this, general and slow exodus out of lightweight and featherweight or welterweight or whoever to go fight him, it could work. But most of those guys are tied up. He'd be facing fairly difficult road ahead in securing any kind of fights that I think even he would want. People are debating here. Comparison: if Junior Dos Santos never gave Cain Velasquez a rematch after he TKO'd him, would we have ever seen that monster that he still is? Potentially. True or false? A Diaz brother will hold a UFC belt one day. False. I mean, not impossible, but unlikely. But I mean, they're giving out interim belts that didn't exist for reasons that don't make sense. So who knows? Glory Collision, someone's asking about. Yeah, this will be on Saturday and during the afternoon, if I recall correctly. Here is the card for that, which apparently is quite good. Certainly at the top, it's Bader Hardy taking on Rico Verhoeven. Oh, man, where's the card for this? And it's on pay-per-view as well. Here we are. Rico Verhoeven versus Bader Hardy. Nikki Holtzkin versus Cedric Doumbé. Ismail Lant versus Jamal Ben Sadiq. And then there'll be the Super Bantamweight Grand Prix final bout, I think, from earlier in the card. We'll see how that goes. Will I be watching that? I don't know. We'll see. On Saturday, I got a wife, All right, Bjorn Rebney. Oh, who won between Rico and Bader? I'm not one to pick against Rico, but Bader is unpredictable. He certainly looks to be in shape. I don't know that they have the strictest drug testing regimen in the world of kickboxing. We'll see. I lean Rico, but Bader's incredibly unpredictable. All right, Bjorn Rebney. Hi, Luke. I was just curious because I haven't been in MMA for a long time and just wondering what makes Bjorn Rebney so disliked by other MMA people. Why are they appalled by him working for the MMAAA, which is what I'm going to call it for now on. I'm not going to call it the MMAA. I'm not going to list letters like I'm doing Morse code or something. Barbas is over there just being a retard. Okay. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'll take that back. He's being an idiot. All right, Bjorn Rebney. Okay, why is it? Why are people appalled by him? People are appalled by him because a couple of things. Number one, I think you've seen it for this week. There was a fairly so he had a bad run in boxing to begin with. When he came to MMA, it wasn't like he was carrying a ton of baggage in that regard, but he nevertheless he had sort of like fallen out of favor in boxing, I think, to put it mildly. I think he had some deals with Sugar Ray Leonard that had gone bad. And it wasn't like he had a high opinion of him. Now, again, that I think MMA fans were largely clueless about that, but it wasn't like he came in with a sterling reputation or any reputation that folks needed to take seriously at all. I think that was one part of it. Another part of it was they had a model that didn't make a lot of sense. It was a tournament model, and I think some people were like, "Oh, I like that better." And I think some people did like that better, but I think we've all realized that's really not the best way to generate ratings, all things being equal. And so there was a lot of complaints lobbied about that. And then I think the real problem was, this is true. When he got big enough, he was antagonistic towards the UFC, which you can see how that might have played out both in his favor and against him. And that there was a concerted effort. I don't think it was prolonged necessarily, but if you're just new to UFC in the last year, you can't appreciate what used to be Dana White's daily things on Twitter or video interviews he would do, or sorry, Barbara, what are you doing? All the various things he would do. I remember all the, that's effing illegal video against Gary Shaw. He would murder Gary Shaw. Now, Gary Shaw came in with a terrible reputation, or at least a mixed one from boxing, but he had pretty strong partners. And I think for Bellator, it just kind of felt like it was this it wasn't like it was tearing the world up, but it was surviving. The initial model was built to survive. We'll take the site fees from casinos, and come here. Okay, this is the guy making all that noise. Here's the point. Somewhere along the way, he started going after the UFC. And the UFC began to return the favor, and I think he got beat up as a consequence of it. There was a little bit of back and forth. He was inviting criticism. They were happy to deliver it, and this was back when Dana White was just absolutely killing people all the time for it. On Twitter, on videos and interviews. In the they have now UFC Embedded, but UFC Embedded basically used to be like before all the big events. They just follow Dana's life around, and they stopped doing that. I forget what they called those, but in any event, so he began to invite this criticism. But the real turning point was, one, the Eddie Alvarez lawsuit. I think, two, a lot of guys would leave Bellator and they wouldn't have necessarily favorable things to say about him. And then three, obviously during his time there, King Mo had big problems with him. And you'll recall when he left, it wasn't like there was necessarily this giant flood of people who came out to sing his praises. Now, I wound up speaking to a lot of Bellator staff after the fact. And I think what a lot of them said was that he was, again, I don't know this to be true or not true. I can only repeat to you what was told to me. But my impressions from talking to them was that it wasn't like he wasn't a dedicated guy to the business. In fact, if they had one really positive thing to say about him, it was that the guy gave everything he had to Bellator. Every ounce of his own pocket that made sense, every waking moment, every day. He may have had some creative vision problems. He may have had some strategic blunders, but it wasn't that he didn't care, and it wasn't that he was not working overtime, and I mean overtime, to get that done, but that he was just a control freak, or that he was demeaning to some employees. Apparently, just on a personal level, he could have been difficult to deal with. Now, in heaping all that stress on himself, say bye, Falcor, Atreyu. All right. And heaping all that stress on himself, maybe that contributed to it. But I think that's a huge part of it. In other words, there was, I hesitate to call it a smear campaign, but Dana White was really effective at making other promoters look bad at a certain time in mixed martial arts, and I think he took advantage of that in that space, although this happened towards the tail end of that. And he did some of that to Strikeforce too, but Coker was, you'll recall, assiduously non-confrontational about it. He would just say, we're doing something different. We appreciate that, but we're not really focused on that. He never, ever went to war with the UFC. And erstwhile, was really good about generating some publicity for guys who were disaffected by them, right? Truth is, though, Coker's done his fair share of things. They released Will Brooks in a way where he couldn't really, a small example, couldn't really bargain to get more for his kind of money. It's not as bad as taking Eddie Alvarez to court, but I'm just sort of pointing out that none of these guys have necessarily an impressive record. And I think the other thing for Bjorn was that, you still hear it a little bit, right? When he was on MTV, he was like, "This deal is magical." I think he always used the word magic or magical. And, it was just this like really over the top promotion, this really over the top language. And he never really caught on with fans. Dana White, again, for whatever you think of him, great, evil, somewhere in between. There's no doubt that at a certain point, and even to this day, but certainly I think there was a high water mark a few years ago where he had the fans in the palm of his hand. What he said was law. And during that time when he was bashing rivals, they just couldn't ever get a leg up. And I think, so it was, long story short, Rebney's own style brought this on himself, his own words, maybe some of his managerial decisions, some of the things he did with the individual fighters, and that he was just sort of, verbally trashed by a very powerful figure who had a lot of things to say, There are guys that Dana White bashed during the time in which Dana White had like this incredible command of the media because he was in the media so much. I don't think their reputations ever recovered. Did like Loretta Hunt's reputation ever recover? Josh Gross has stuck it out because Josh is an amazing guy, but there's a lot of people that their reputations never recovered. Like if you went to battle with him, you had to be very careful about how much you want to push it. I don't think that's very much the case anymore, which is probably a good thing. Yeah, I got this question here, and I got it on my radio show too, and I think I want to answer it. So I'm going to try and make contact with Bjorn this week so I can learn more about it from my own point of view. There's nothing like a personal conversation to get that done, and I know he wants to speak as well, so I'm looking forward to having a conversation with him because I think one of the things we don't want to do is was taking Eddie to court a bad idea? Yeah, it was. I think so. I even asked him at the time, I was like, you are legally able to go white knuckle with Eddie is a different question than whether or not that makes sense. Like you have a chance to curry favor with the fan base and you are doing the very things that will guarantee that you won't. Don't you think that's a bad idea? And at the time he was like, absolutely not. It's not a bad idea at all. We have to protect our business. I was like, okay, well, protect it, but you're going to damage a lot of things in the process. Let me make sure everything's okay here. Yeah, let's see. Okay. But so I was asking about Rebney's interview in the MMA Hour, and I got this question. on my radio show yesterday, I think, which is when it comes to analyzing the untrustworthiness of a source, Rebney seems to tick all the boxes. He has clear reason for ulterior motive, and he was using extremely emotional language while discussing the UFC. It comes across as bitterness towards Dana and Lorenzo as opposed to benevolence to fighters. Yeah, I got this question yesterday, and so my point is, here's the truth. Even if he has antipathy towards the UFC, that's still in part, and I think in substantial part, overlaps with wanting to do the best thing for fighters, right? It's because we make this comment, it's like getting fighters what they want is not necessarily about FU UFC, and that's true. What's really about getting fighters what they want and what they need and what they deserve is a passion for the fighters themselves. That is really what this boils down to. It is belief in who they are and a belief in what they contribute and a belief in studying the larger market and how the arrangements work and divvying up the fair share. But it's also true that to an extent, and this is limited, to an extent, an FU attitude towards the UFC can encompass some ways of promoting fighters' interests. I think ultimately it will backfire. I think it won't actually get the full depth and breadth of things needed to cover the interests of fighters. But if you really wanted to launch a campaign against the UFC, could you do it through a fighters union or association, I think you could start that way. I think that'd be one way to potentially skin that cat. And I think we have to open ourselves to that possibility. I don't know that that's really ultimately what gets Bjorn Rebney up in the day. Maybe it is. Maybe I'll get some clarification on this from when I speak to him later. But you're not the only person who's noticed that. I'll put it that way. All right. This was emailed to me. Double MAAA question. Is it Bjorn Rebney's history as a promoter, or is it his personality that's a problem for people? A little bit of both. As it seems to me, his personality is the reason why he was chosen for the role, and how different would people's reaction be if it was Coker playing the same role. I don't also, how awesome would it be if Hughes and Liddell joined the association? Well, that's not going to happen. But there's a little look. Why is Spike and Bellator promoting themselves as fighters first? They don't actually offer comprehensive, or any kind of, not comprehensive, I should say, but they don't even offer accident insurance to their guys. Pay rates there are, on average, lower. Even at the high end, they don't match what the UFC does. It's easier to get a big paycheck in the UFC than it is. No, I shouldn't say that necessarily. It can be a lot easier to get a big paycheck in the UFC. Bigger paychecks in the UFC are handed out more often. Certainly, I can say that. More sense to go to Bellator, which we've discussed 1,000 times. But like, if you're Scott Coker and you're Spike, why would you want to label yourselves as fighters first? Is it because they wake up and they're like, oh my God, I just can't sleep without thinking about fighters? I don't think it is. And I don't blame them. I don't expect them to. That's deeply unrealistic. It's done because we are living in an age where we have this one promoter, this one entity that has an extraordinary amount of control over the market and over the assets of the market, and whatever you make of that control. And as a way to not only differentiate themselves, but a way to make themselves attractive, they are doing this fighters first bit. And it's not merely that. It's at a time when there is the most amount of disaffection I've ever seen in the ranks among fighters ever. 5 years ago, fighters did not speak out like this, ever. It didn't happen. Certainly 7 or 8 years ago, this was unthinkable. Think about the time of UFC 100. Were fighters speaking out like this? No. Some were, and then they were trashed and thrown aside. It was never like this. So you're talking about a time where there is record levels of vocal, public anyway, discontent. It's a time when you're trying to attract talent. It's a time when you're trying to attract names. I'm not here to suggest that Coker is a dishonest promoter. He's not. But most guys who deal with him have a really positive thing to say about him. I do think he tries to do right by the vast majority of guys that he does business with. I'm not impugning his character. However, he's not Mother Teresa, and neither is Dana White, and neither is Bjorn Rebney. None are any of these guys. They're businessmen. Some run a different kind of business than others. Some run a kind that is more appealing to the people who work for them than others, but that's what he is. So like, everyone's like, oh, would the MMA association be better if it was Coker? Like, Coker has probably, I can't speak for him, but as I understand it, was never even approached about this job, even though Tim Kennedy seemed to suggest otherwise, but his people deny it. And he's a businessman. Don't ever forget it. He might be a businessman that runs a better business, but he's a businessman. That's what he is fundamentally at heart. And he's done some things that fans have not liked. All right. So let's not forget about that. Also, look, I thought it was a strategic mistake to put Bjorn Rebney out there in these pictures and stuff. I didn't quite understand the value of that. But Tim Kennedy's explanation of like why you would want Bjorn Rebney on staff makes a ton of sense. A guy who essentially knows the space. He knows the ways in which the promoter's job is not really essential to the business, but what the promoter does specifically in fostering partnerships and how they understand ticket sales and ticket vendors. And I mean, the list goes on and on and on of all the things that they have to know and what they know and the points of sale. And you get it. Like, he really offers a tremendous amount of knowledge in that regard. I mean, there's how many guys have promoted MMA on a national level for a sustained period of time? Bjorn Rebney, Scott Coker, Ray Sefo, Dana White, Do you want to say Gary Shaw? I mean, that was in a different era. That doesn't really count. The IFL guys, Garib Sheamus, that doesn't really count. It's a different era. Tom Atencio doesn't count. For sure doesn't count. You know, maybe you could say Reed Harris with WEC. Maybe you could say that. That's it. That's the list of guys. Like, there's not a whole lot of other guys. So in that sense, Bjorn Rebney is a little bit of a unicorn that they can latch onto. And I think as a lawyer, when he speaks in these other meetings with these people who are, you know, tangential or at least, you know, half into the MMA space, the Monster Energy drinks, the Ticket Masters, the whoever, he probably comes off as quite convincing and knowledgeable. I can see him being very, very helpful in that regard. It's just that MMA fans don't necessarily buy who he is. Worst fighter of the year. With so much talk of the fighter of the year, would you agree that RDA had the worst 2016 of any UFC fighter, considering where he was in January to where he is now? Well, I mean, worst fighter, I mean, that's not sure. I mean, you mean which elite fighter had the most disappointing year? We could do that one. Chris Weidman would certainly be on the list, I think, for that one. RDA probably would be on the list for that one, although he had I mean, what was his... I apologize for Barbas over there. It's driving me crazy who I'm going to throw out the window when this chat is over. Yeah, here's the 2016 for Dos Anjos. Lost his title in July. Remember, he was supposed to fight McGregor before that. That fell through. And then lost to Tony Ferguson. So he had a rough 2016. 2016 was not kind to this guy. Dos Anjos was expected to face Conor McGregor in March. So he missed out on the McGregor fight in March, lost his title in July, and then got whooped up on last month. That's a tough year. But when you ever say worst year, I mean, there might be some amateur fighter there that lost 4 times this year or something, you know. But if we're talking about like which elite fighter had, you know, from the point they were at the end of 2015 to where they are now, who had the biggest decline? Certainly, you know, losing a belt and then losing the subsequent title and then losing out on an extraordinary economic opportunity. Yeah, they probably hurt. They probably hurt real bad. Who else would you guys count? Chris Weidman had a bad one. Eddie Wineland had a bit of a rebound year. Rafael Dos Anjos, who's had a really tough year. Ronda Rousey had a tough year and she didn't even compete. Who else would you guys say? Someone says, to be fair, Mother Teresa wasn't much of a Mother Teresa. Yes, I know, Christopher Hitchens, about the debatable nature of the altruistic endeavors and aims of Mother Teresa, but just work with me here, please. Someone says there's a definite change in Dana's behavior pre-corporate UFC and post-corporate UFC. Wonder if that continues. I don't know how much it'll change from today, but this should not surprise you. This is a world where there is no free lunch. There is no free lunch. What you say matters. And again, not everything you say is going to be wisdom. Lots of things you say are going to be wrong. Lots of things you say are going to be intemperate. Lots of things you're going to say are going to be misconstrued, poorly worded. That's just the problem of being a public figure and having to say things in the course of your job. Better to just be behind the scenes in some ways. But the things he was doing, where he was taunting opposition, where he was being could not stop cursing. And again, I've got my fair share of ridiculous things I've said in my life too. I am no means above it, but he was playing with fire back in the day. And as the winds of change began to hit and the fighters began to realize we can use some of these statements against him, it became quite clear he couldn't do that anymore. This was sort of like, I think, some of the things leading into the UFC fighter lawsuit. At the time, he, of course, blamed it on MMA media, like, oh, they always take what I say and misconstrue it. It's like, did they misconstrue it for those many years when you kept doing it? I mean, if anything, if there's any criticism to make of the MMA media, is that they were stenographers, not that they were challenging him. But in any event, that's just a cover for the fact that those statements were then cobbled together and used in that fighter lawsuit. Like, you can't just get away with saying things like that, at least not for very long. All of it will come back. All of it. all of it, and it did. Now, in the end, that lawsuit may ultimately fail. I don't know, but certainly it provided them a level of ammunition that they wouldn't ordinarily had. And everyone's like, why do these? I remember there was this big debate, like, oh, what Dana White does is so refreshing, and I think to a lot of people that it was. It really was refreshing to some extent to have a guy go out there and go, what I think about that guy? Fuck that guy. Something like that. They're like, oh yeah, this is how we talk in our living rooms, and that's true. For a while there, it feels really great, but at the end of the day, there's a reason why the most successful ones don't do that, and the reason why is because all of that will come back to haunt you. Everyone loves the tough guy shtick, and I'm not saying it was shtick. Maybe that is how he is, but like everyone loves that, at least veneer or not, they love it for a time. But in the end, it just you grow seeds of discontent. And when power structures change and when realities change, all of those things that were done to put distance between a person, to demean an entity, they will all come back. They will all come back. And so I understand every once in a while we crave that level of honesty, but that's not how we're built up here. And it's certainly not how we're built from a litigation standpoint. We are built to inventory the things people say and either promote that for our own causes or use that to prosecute a case against someone, especially someone with a lot of money who is operating in a system that some deem to be unfair. So always remember that. Always remember, like, there's a reason why Roger Goodell doesn't go out there and go, God, you know what I think about Tom Brady and this Deflategate thing? I think they're both loser bums, and I changed their bum life or whatever he wanted. There's a reason why he doesn't do that, because that would be a very bad call. You might find it refreshing if you didn't already hate Roger Goodell, but there is no such thing as a free lunch. Doesn't happen. Not for me, not for you, not for anyone. And here you go. All right, let's keep it going. Holloway versus Pettis. All right. Look, who do you think wins? I think Max Holloway wins, but I don't really know. I feel like Max will beat Anthony, okay? And then we'll do so against Jose Aldo, and we'll defend the title multiple times afterwards, even if Conor goes down to challenge him. I think Max is one of the few fighters who can adjust properly to beat the kind of style that McGregor brings. Well, we'll see. The Jose Aldo part, let's not get that far. But to stick with this, I think if Holloway can sort of use that trademark movement, and he's really good about figuring out which weapons a person's going to use. And this sounds sort of like, this isn't very specific, but he just simply takes them away from you. You have to watch it in real time to see it. But even from, it could be something as small as a stance switch. But here's my thing about Holloway. He starts out here and then slowly gets in here. In other words, he doesn't mix it up and then retreat to kickboxing range. He starts at way far away and then slowly finds his way inside. Now, if he sees an opening, he'll take it. That's not to say he doesn't throw anything but kickboxing range strikes, but he generally has this approach where he closes distance only over time, only as it makes sense. And then as he really begins to pour it on, he might go for a takedown, he might go for mount, that kind of thing. But he likes to start at a very safe distance and make adjustments from there and then slowly work his way inside. And I think for a guy like Anthony Pettis, who might be a little bit more willing to come forward, who might be a little bit more willing to throw different ranges in different ways, try to mix it up in that kind of way. And again, the whole time Pettis is mixing it up, Holloway's mixing it up, but he mixes it up at a very safe space at first anyway. I feel like it's a bit of a bad matchup. But look, but what if Pettis goes in there and just leg kicks him to death and Holloway has no answer? That wouldn't surprise me either. But if I just forced to make a bet, I just feel like the guy who operates in a way where he puts the fight, you've in this 8-9 fight win streak that he's on, when was the last time you saw him fight out of a disadvantage? Like almost never. He never puts himself in positions where he has to fight out of a deficit, either because someone has his back or he's rocked or he's getting backed up when he doesn't want to get back. You just never see it. He fights in these incredibly diverse and safe ways, and yet stays active enough on offense to just keep guys tripped up. It's incredible what he's able to do, and I don't know that Pettis is going to have an answer to that, especially as it goes late. they calling me. Let's see. Hold on just 1 second. Sorry about this. I got this dude coming over to help me film this thing in studio today. All right. Okay. Another question from the inbox. Would the UFC attract more viewers with an earlier start time so the main event started around 11 instead of 1? I couldn't get any of my friends interested in watching UFC 205 with me because the event ran so late. My friends are casual fans and watch the occasional card, but the length of the late start of 205 turned them off. I believe the UFC's oversaturation problem extends beyond too many events to the events that are too long. Am I wrong in thinking the structure of UFC events is turning away viewers? Is the late start typical in another pay-per-view sport, i.e. boxing? There's no other sport that goes as late as this one that I'm aware of, at least in the United States. I realize that everyone, and every time you say something like this, everyone in the UK is like, bro, we don't start watching fights till 6 a.m. It's like, that's cool, man, but this is a US-based company. Like they may do shows in the UK, but it's an American company, right? So like we have the right of first refusal on this one. And yeah, going till 1:30 is just, it's insane. But no. Well, Mayweather had some pretty late ones. I remember the second Maidana fight was like unbearably long, or maybe it was the first Maidana fight where they didn't start that fight until midnight or something. But or even past that, maybe like 12:30, something insane. But to answer your question, there's a heavy West Coast audience that is a big component of the fight game, which you just can't really. I'm not saying they couldn't end things a little bit earlier. I think getting past 1 o'clock is really just over the line. But the point being is, they have flirted many times with having events that ended earlier. Or start, like, for example, that time they had pay-per-views starting at like 9 p.m. and they just didn't get the kinds of returns on that they wanted, and they went pretty quickly right back to the 10 p.m. start time, and that's fine. I just feel like part of this is exacerbated by those fight nights. I wouldn't mind if UFC 205 did gangbusters, so like your friends weren't able to come over, but the vast majority of people who wanted to watch that fight did. That were not turned off by these facts. That's the other part. I think this problem is just exacerbated because Fox Sports 1 just basically tortures their audience. They don't care about, they care about their audience in terms of being able to sell all the ad inventory that they have. But putting 6 fights on a main card, starting at 10 o'clock and going until 1:30. Like if you don't, here's how crazy a Fox Sports 1 event is. If you don't set your DVR automatically to go at least 30 minutes past the normal recording window, it's almost a certainty you'll miss the main event. Think about that. Like you wouldn't even catch half the main event. You'll just miss it. You might get around. It's just bananas. It's bananas is what it is. It's completely unfair to the viewership. But what are they supposed to do? You save the best for last. You're just stringing them along the whole time. And there's no real easy answer because no one hates FS1 broadcasts enough to not watch the FS1 broadcast because of what's usually at the top of it. But so they've got you by the balls on this one, unfortunately. I think if it went back to the days where it was FX, where they were starting at 9 and it was a 4-fight card, they were done around 11:30. This was magic. This was, in the words of Bjorn Rebney, it was magic. That's what we need to get back to, or at least 5-fight card starting at 9. I think that would be a little bit more moderate. But when you got a low-rated network that needs those viewers for those live events coming back, you got to keep them there as long as possible. You got to sell as much ad inventory as possible, and they're not really going to walk because it's a special kind of fan base with, frankly, a special kind of loyalty. There you go. Someone says 46% of the American population lives in the Eastern time zone, while 17% live in the Pacific zone. I don't understand catering to the West Coast. You don't see NFL starting at Super Bowl at 10 p.m. No, you don't. But that's a little bit different. Super Bowls are on Sundays for starters. Second of all, I think that there is a unique portion of the MMA viewing audience that is to the West. I'm not saying things can't be amended, that they should be amended. Again, I think going past 12:30 is kind of like Like, come on, fellas, what are we doing here? But I don't think that the entire MMA industry is confused. I think that they're doing this because it works. Oh, someone wrote me an email that I wanted to read on the air. And it was bone to pick with MMA media. So this is what he says. I noticed after the Demetrius Johnson fight on Saturday, a lot of media members decided to direct their attention onto how Mighty Mouse drew the smallest attendance of the year and used that to make a story about his unpopularity. Here's an example, blah, 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 blah. It says Tough 24's finale gate, 188 grand, and attendance 2,044 are both the lowest of any UFC event in 2016. Why this annoys me is because the Palms Casino Resort is a small venue that only holds about 2,000 fans. DJ versus Elliott actually drew the fourth highest attendance in the UFC Palms Casino Resort history and was just 27 shy of what Anderson Silva drew there for the Team Lesnar versus Team Dos Santos finale. No, excuse me, of the Silva versus Irving fight, which was 2,071. I'm sorry. The highest was the Ultimate Fighter US versus UK finale, which was 2,217. I just get annoyed because when numbers get posted with no context or manipulating context, I start to see MMA fans run with the story saying, see, no one cares about Demetrius. In this case, it's not true. On top of a solid attendance, the TV ratings came out and the show turned out to do pretty well. So, there you go. Everyone want to know about that. By the way, let's see here. I sort of heard from this pharmacist about the things that, remember, this is the guy that wrote me about Chad Mendez. He also wrote me about, or she, well, no, it's he, wrote me about John Jones on the Joe Rogan Experience. Here's what he says. They kept referring to clomiphene or clomiphene, whatever, as an estrogen blocker, which it is not. Estrogen blocker is the common name for a group of drugs called aromatase inhibitors. Drugs like anastrozole, letrozole, or however they pronounce these stupid words, letrozole. Clomiphene is an anti-estrogen or selective estrogen receptor modulator, or SERM. In men, they basically do the same thing, increase the body's testosterone production. So this isn't the most egregious vocabulary error ever. However, clomiphene wouldn't help you get an erection, at least not as fast as Cialis would. You'd have to be taking it daily for a couple of weeks to see an increase in testosterone, as more testosterone would help with libido than actual dick function. Pardon my language. There were a few other things that didn't make sense to me in John's story. First of all, he referred to the pill as off-brand Cialis. If you know any other older gentlemen with erectile dysfunction, you may be aware that there is no generic or off-brand versions of any PDE5 inhibitors, aka dick pills. Viagra, Cialis, Levitra, all those babies have their patents in full force, making them very expensive and older men very angry. I think he was just sort of like referring to it in a generic sense. This doesn't mean that you can't get your gas station or off the internet in some sort of sketchy Chinese dick pills. You can. This is what I assume was the case with John until he said something otherwise. He said he got his stuff through a friend's girlfriend who was a pharmacist, which to me implies it was some sort of behind-the-counter formulation. Like I mentioned before, with Mendez, the FDA regulating this stuff, it's not going to happen. If John would have said he got it at the gas station, the story would be very plausible. The fact that USADA checked the product and confirms the story of contamination makes me know that something like this is what really happened. If clomiphene was found in an FDA-regulated product, it would be major news. There would be recalls. I have heard nothing. I don't know why John would say something about how he got the stuff. If you assume that pharmacists' part is true, it would have to be some sort of supplement this pharmacist got for him, not an actual medicine. Also, there aren't many pharmacists willing to throw away a 6-figure job and 8-year education and risk jail time to help their boyfriend's friend get an erection by stealing behind-the-counter drugs. I think that's happened, just saying. I'd like to clarify that I think almost all MMA fighter stories of accidental ingestion are plausible, including John's, and I believe the vast majority of them. I think John just fudged some details to make it more easy to follow and not sound as bad. Gas station dick pills having clomiphene and Cialis in them does not surprise me at all. People like to think that the culprit is unwashed machinery leading to contamination. That's very unlikely. In the unregulated supplement world, and when dealing with stuff from foreign countries, the explanation is more likely that they just put some extra stuff in there to make it work better. It makes sense to put steroids in creatine and a testosterone booster in a sexual performance drug. Donks take the stuff and say, wow, this really works. And the company's sales go up. To this day, in my mind, the only confirmed cheater who had intent to gain an edge was, and this is his opinion, Mendez. I know Rogan brought it up today again on the podcast saying Chad's story was confirmed. Makes me think, this is his words, not mine. Makes me think he eats yellow mustard on his well-done steaks. If Mendez's story were true, textbooks would have to be rewritten. There's a reason Mendez didn't challenge it and all these other athletes have. If you ever see him, let him know what's up. There you go. That is one pharmacist to you donks. There you go. Okay, from the inbox. I have been left pondering how one may able to beat DJ after his great performance last weekend. I was brought to an interesting thought and just want to bounce it off of you. So we saw that DJ was in trouble early as he was struggling to find his rhythm. And to your point, after he gets past that, he becomes nearly unbeatable. He finds the way to win, then consistently applies it. So that makes me wonder if a guy similar to Max Holloway would be the type, would a guy like Max Holloway be the guy to beat a guy like Johnson? I'm not saying that Max is the guy to do it, nor am I contemplating that fight, as Holloway is simply too big. However, as you have stated, he has the ability to change and make adjustments throughout the entire fight. Do you believe that a 125-pound fighter that has the ability to put pressure on DJ early, then consistently change his approach, is the key to beating Johnson, who has the ability to find the one crack in the fighter's armor and picking it apart? Yeah, that's certainly one way to do it. We don't see this at flyweight, but you could get a Khabib Nurmagomedov type who would just be too big and too strong and too, he's not so big necessarily, I'm just saying, so dominant in one or two, I would say for Khabib, sort of two general phases of the game, that they could just apply that. We don't see anyone like that in that flyweight division currently, but sure, like as good as Demetrius is, he's not like otherworldly level grappler. He's a very good one, but he's not like, oh my God, one, right? We've seen him as a striker. He's a very good one, but he's not like holy crap one. He's amazing in the clinch. That would be a little bit harder to see someone who could just tear him up in the clinch like that. But you get the idea. Like it also is possible that someone may just come along and have mastery of one or two phases of the game to just absolutely crush him. That seems at least possible, although not at the temporary or at the moment in time, highly unlikely. But the other option simply might be that what you've articulated here, that a guy who can find a way to win in ways and then change it up and keep Demetrius Johnson guessing the whole time. Yeah, I think that would be one possibility. It's just when you look around in the same scenario I just posited, someone who has extraordinary mastery of some of the phases of the game, this person doesn't exist. You know, they just don't exist. No one's unbeatable. No one's unbeatable. I think we saw that last weekend. We've seen it any number of different times. But if you're asking like who can beat Demetrius Johnson, it's either someone who's got one ace in the hole that he just doesn't have, who he can't answer for, or someone who is just keeping him guessing through their own adjustments, sort of giving him his own medicine a little bit. But whoever that is going to be quite good. Or he just ages out and can't keep up and he just gets, bulldozed. Something like that might happen too. Okay. A bunch of these have like 2 recommendations. What's next for Nick Diaz? Jesus, who the hell knows? It has been relatively quiet around Nick lately. What fights would you most like to see him in? Lawler, GSP, Condit, Anderson Silva, Cowboy, Belfort, Connor. Lawler, yes. GSP, no. Well, they might do that because I know GSP is pining for that one. Condit, no. Silva, no. Cowboy, yes. Belfort, sure. Connor, why not? Ooh, you know what? This one didn't get erect, but I want to get to it. If we take Cyborg's latest claims about her weight cut at face value, then it's fair to say she has been trying to cut too much water weight and cannot make 135 in her current condition and likely never will. I'll say that's basically correct, but not really. It's fine. However, we should also not demand women who can make that weight comfortably go up in weight to fight her. If they want to, that is their choice, but we don't make demands on men going up in weight class until they've completely cleared out their division. If none of the top women at 135 want to go to face her and the UFC truly wants to make a 145-pound title, then who is there for Cyborg to fight? Invicta is thin on the ground for talent, and no one there seems to be ready to face her. Where are these 145ers which would make up the division? Okay, so this is an interesting question. Number one, obviously we've got Charmaine Tweet, I think, going up against Megan Anderson here in, January, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think either of them are ready for Cyborg, but the point about building a division is, look, Cyborg, and I think we just have to accept this, is so vastly ahead of her time. There is no short-term solution to her problem. It just doesn't exist, because you got Holly Holm, who's like, yeah, I'd fight her at 138, but they all know that that's sort of ridiculous. That she can, it's not ridiculous. I mean, I understand it, but it's not ridiculous for Holly Holm to not want to fight her above 138. I'm saying it puts us in a ridiculous situation where we're trying to find a weird weight for this to work, because they seem fairly reluctant to go about doing it, and you can understand why. She's just ahead of her time. That's just the reality of it. The question is, if you erect her as a champion, and presumably she'll keep winning for the foreseeable future, how much can you, in the process of doing so, build an actual division behind her so that when she leaves, it can then carry on her own? I wonder if that might be worth it. I wonder if, by saying we have a 145-pound division, if that might make promoters across the country more willing to make 145, if that might recruit more women who would be in that weight class, and then over time you can begin to do something about it. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe it would fall on its face. That's a very real possibility. But I just think at this point, it's worth trying. And the reason why it's worth trying is, one, for the reasons I just mentioned, that it could lead to some kind of relative blossoming of that weight class, although, there's reasons to think it wouldn't, but I'm just saying. But the other reason is this, I think it's just time that if you were out there, and I said this yesterday, and I would really think it's important to reiterate, if you were one of the people out there who was saying, Cyborg can just make 135, all she has to do is just run more and eat less, it's time you admit that that was just a total fantasy. It was a conspiracy theory, and it was never true. Now, there is probably some argument to make that if she sat down with UFC brass and was like, okay, I'm in on this plan to make 140 first and then work my way down to 135, she does bear some culpability for that. If you're telling people you can do something and either you can't, or it became apparent to you at some point that, okay, this is just not possible, it's incumbent upon you to A, say as much, and then B, articulate some responsibility. And so I think she's done the former, but not quite the latter. So if you wanted to make that claim, I'd be okay with it. But here's the reality. I think she said that in part because she realized that was, at the time, really her only possibility to getting a big fight, to getting in the UFC. She may have agreed to something that she knew she couldn't do just because that was really her only ticket in. Bit of a Trojan horse. I'll go in on these terms and I'll be able to get these things in the end. And you might call that duplicitous, but it's also, it seems to have worked, right? Or maybe it wasn't. I don't know exactly what the nature of their talks were, but here's my point. It was pretty clear all along that she couldn't make it, right? She has to do a very serious cut to make 145. Now she can manage that, but she can do it. And in trying to push her down, when she was saying over and over again, I don't think I can do this, when it dawned on her, when she was quite public about it, and making her go to 140, it damaged her so badly. It cost her so much physically, pardon me. Your boy's got allergies. That by the time she is now done with that venture and they're offering her 145-pound fights, she's so ravaged by the destruction that even on what is basically a relatively normal timeline, 8 to 10 weeks, that's pretty normal, if not actually pretty good, she can't even take it. Because that's how much damage she has done in the pursuit of nothingness. It's time. It's time I pour out a 40 for Cyborg 135-pound bantamweight truthers, because it's finally over. It was never really real. It never made sense to me. And I think we need to take account of that. In a world where we're trying to do more to get rid of weight cutting, the only person we were doing that opposite for was Cyborg. We're all moving this direction and pushing her that direction. She might bear some responsibility for jumping on the sailboard, but boy, we were behind the sail, weren't we? It's grotesque, and it should never happen again, and it was totally wrong from the get-go. If the UFC didn't want to have a 145-pound division, and they still don't, depending on how things go, it's absolutely within their right to say that. I mean, it's their company. They can and will do what they want. But it was so bizarre the way her body was policed. It was so bizarre the way we held over a fairly ancient infraction that she paid for. And that there is this belief, man, USADA is cleaning up the sport, except when it comes to Cyborg, because she's just still tap dancing in front of him while she's shooting up, apparently. You know, I don't know what you think of USADA if you think they're working except for her, that you don't think that they're working. That's what they do for all the people who they claim are still cheating. Oh, they're just cheating under their noses. I mean, I'm sure some people are, but, you know, you're telling me this program is the best one. You know, they're not catching her. How come? Oh, steroid benefits last late into someone's athletic development, right? Well, all those studies are based on mice, so that might be true, but it might not be true. So we don't really actually know to what extent there is actually a real benefit, which I brought up before. We don't actually know to what extent people benefit from performance-enhancing drug use in mixed martial arts, but that's a different argument. Anyway. If you were one of these people who are out there pumping this line and doing this like armchair dietitian thing, all she has to do is just run more and eat some kale. Okay, you're part of the problem. And look, I've been wrong about 1,000 things. I will continue to be wrong about 1,000 things. And every time I am, you guys call me out on it, which is good. Keeps me honest, keeps the conversation honest. That's what we want. We want that ability to have that kind of thing happen. But it has to work both ways. If you are out there doing it, you need to just acknowledge it was wrong. And not only was it wrong, it was a giant, giant waste of everybody's time, including the UFC's. It was a waste of their time. And now we have our 145, and we can't even get that going on a reasonable timeline because of the extraordinary damage caused as a consequence. I had Chris Lieben on my show talking about how he's on thyroid medication the rest of his life because of the damage he did from weight cutting. Did he even do anything like she did? All right. What's the buzz on the Fighters Association, the Double MMAAA? It's been a week since Rebney and Co.'s big announcement, and what and who they are is still a little vague. It's true. I haven't really heard any fighters coming out in public and giving their 100% support. I think Cole Miller did, if I'm not mistaken. Have you heard what the vibe is amongst fighters off the record? Some of the ones I've spoken to have been really positive about it. I don't know if they're going to join. They didn't divulge those details, but the ones I've spoken to in the past week or so seem very excited about it. What are your thoughts on the MMA or the Double MMAAA 1 week deep? You know, I thought, okay, so there were some criticisms of them that I didn't understand. To be sure, there are criticisms to make. I think the three biggest are, one, the role of Rebney. I think while we can all understand his contribution to the organization makes sense, it does carry some baggage. Number two, is this a proxy war between CAA and WME being played out through MMA associations/unions? That's another concern. And the third concern is essentially their approach as association versus union. Certain ones confer certain benefits, right? I think with the PFA, we all knew they wanted to get certified by the NLRB, and then they would work out a collective bargaining agreement. It would allow them to strike, but it would protect the UFC from, or it would provide them antitrust exemptions. Associations don't exactly do that, but they may become a union at some point. They want to strike a deal as an association and then become a union, but that would create some problems with the lawsuit. I mean, there's a variety of different approaches here that don't quite make sense. So the other one here is sort of the fuzziness, not of their purpose necessarily, but their strategy. Those are the three major criticisms you can make, I think, of what they have done in the first week. Sort of what I think is a reasonable criticism. I saw some of the criticisms like, well, they only had 5 fighters up there. It's like, okay, what do you want them to have? You think they're just going to go behind the scenes and get 100 people to sign up for this and How would that work? Like, it's a miracle that they got the ones that they did. I'm talking about it because it's a miracle that they did that. It is a miracle that they've got Donald Cerrone, who is an active UFC fighter. It's a miracle that they got Tim Kennedy, an active UFC fighter, 2 guys from Jackson's. It's a miracle that they got Cain Velasquez, a former UFC heavyweight champion at AKA, and George St. Pierre. I mean, this is an insane level of achievement. And they realize that's good enough to then turn the corner and then go into whatever phase 2 of their operation might be, or whatever phase number it is in their own mind. But let's say publicly phase 2 anyway. Found that criticism of them to be quite hollow, to be almost ridiculous, to be fair. I think if you're going to have one, it's on the first 3, not anything else, or maybe something minor. But on the positive side, I mentioned they just got those guys, and they appear quite serious about forcing the UFC's hand, and they're better about generating media, and there's a lot of reasons to think that they might be a little bit different. So someone asked a Real Madrid question, and someone else got real mad about it, so I'm going to answer the Real Madrid question. Look, with their central midfield trio, I mean, they got more than a trio. Offensive fullbacks, yes, they do. Dynamic wingers, yes, they are. Do you agree that Real Madrid have the most diverse and effective attack in soccer and football? Well, I don't watch hardly any other team, so it's hard for me to say. I basically only watch Real Madrid and who they play. But, like, just go through their midfield for just a second, and you could sub guys in here. So, of course, James, he doesn't play that much these days, which is ridiculous. But it's another story. I mean, where do you want to go? Kovacic, Kroos, Modric, Isco. You could plug in if you wanted to. You could plug in Asensio. This is not even half the guys who can be in the midfield space. It's an insane level. Who's on the starting one? Let's see who's starting today. Let's see. Just because it made that person mad, I'm going to do this. Here we go. They announced the starting lineup for the BVB game. Let's see. Here's the lineup. Keylor Navas, Carvajal. Carvajal's a beast. Sergio Ramos, Varane, Ronaldo, Benzema, James. Oh, James is starting. Marcelo, how I forget about Casemiro? Lucas Vazquez, another great winger. Modric. They don't even have Bale right now. Then on the bench, you got Kiko Casilla, Pepe, Kroos, Asensio, Morata, Isco, and Danilo. And then, of course, coached by old Zinedine Zidane. It's a fun team to root for. I will say that. All right. From the inbox. What stood out to me over and over on the Joe Rogan podcast is that John Jones's use of what happened to me and what I've been through. This is his quoting, not me. This would indicate to me that he hasn't completely owned up to the reality that these negative things in his life were his fault. Nobody force-fed him alcohol or generic Cialis. And someone put a gif of like Mark Coleman shoving Joe Rogan. I don't even understand what that is. Yeah, I got that sense too. Don't you guys let me ask you a question. Just be honest with me, please. Just please be honest for just one moment in time. No one else is looking. It's just you and me right here for just a second, okay? Aren't you tired of caring about whether or not John Jones recognizes his mistake? Now, I'm not saying that if forced to ask, hey, if someone's done something wrong, shouldn't they own up to it? Of course. 1,000 times, of course. How many years are we going to ask this question before we're just like, all right, man, whatever, dude. I can't pretend to keep caring. I can't. Oh, John Jones needs to answer for his mistakes. Man, let law enforcement figure it out, man. Let USADA figure it out, man. We'll write the story when it's done. I'm tired. I'm tired of being like John Jones's older brother. It feels gross at this point, honestly. I mean, the guy wrecked his Bentley and didn't learn, and then he had the whole issue with using cuffs with drunk driving, hitting the pregnant ladies and running from the scene of the car and all the crime, and then he has he's the guy's taking gas station dick pills. Aren't you tired of being his older brother? I know I am. Either he's going to figure it out or he is not going to figure it out, and we can write the tale, the morality play later on down the road. But for right now, everyone's like, I didn't notice that he learned anything. Me neither. Maybe he's not gonna. Maybe he's not gonna. Maybe he's not that guy. But like from one person to another, aren't you tired of being his big brother? I am sick of it. What I think about it and what you think about it, so does it matter. Every time, in fact, John talks about it, like he does mention the fans and stuff, but it's always like, oh, I let the people down around me and whatever. He never really, I don't get the sense that like the wider world's pressure is what matters to him. And in some ways that's good. And maybe he has figured it out. Maybe these are just words and we're not reading them properly. But like on some level, I am just sick of talking about what Jon Jones should and shouldn't do. Let him figure it out, man. Or let him not figure it out. And I hope he does, of course, right? We all do. But like let's stop being his parent. Let's stop. I'm not saying we have to give into it or something. But I just don't care. I mean, I care, but I just can't care like in the way that we have been anyway. I can care a little bit, oh, hope he gets it together, but everyone wants to like weep and have this gnashing of teeth over it. And how many times are you going to do that, man? How many times are you going to invest that kind of emotional energy in a guy who is learning the hard way in real time before all of us, which by the way is not fair for, like, life's been good to Jon Jones. Let's not lie, but the truth is, and I made this point on my radio show too, this is the one thing I'll say in Jon's defense, like there is no defense of driving drunk, man. Like it's indefensible. And there is no defense of, hitting a woman and running from the scene of the accident. Like these are all, and I use the word loosely, these are despicable things. But the truth is, a lot of us have done despicable things in life. Now, I've never done quite that level, but I've had friends who've had DUIs, and they turn out to be totally successful people. My point being is this. I don't speak for the women who might be watching this or might hear this. Maybe you have a different perspective on this, but for a young guy in his 20s, for any guy in his 20s, you better be glad that the world wasn't watching you. You better count your lucky stars, because I know I made a ton of personal and professional mistakes in my 20s, like a jackass. But I wasn't forced to be held account for it in front of the world. Now, I've never been arrested. I don't have anything like that. But like, you don't have to be arrested to F up your life or F up someone else's life. If you had the luxury of not having the world watch you as a young man in your 20s, drink through bars and engage in God knows what kind of behavior. And I was in the military too, man. I have seen some things. Golly. I am blessed that I didn't have that happen to me. And if you didn't have it happen to you and you partied pretty hard in your 20s, you are lucky. You're lucky. That's just a fact. Again, I'm sure some of you are like, well, I partied in my 20s. I didn't do anything like that. Good on you. Great. But I'm just saying, if you're a guy and you're, let's say, in your mid-30s, you know this. You were a moron in your 20s who knew nothing about the world, who knew, frankly, nothing about himself. You, in all likelihood, or at least a strong likelihood, don't have nearly the level of professional success, financial management, sort of life stability that you have now. You didn't have that in your 20s at all, even close. And I know I certainly didn't. There was a while I was aimless and reckless and going nowhere with my life, and I somehow managed to turn it all around. But I think, and I'm like, look, I've never done some of the things that Jon has done. Okay, categorically, I've never done it. But I wasn't a millionaire in my 20s. Jesus, I was broke in my 20s. And I made countless personal mistakes. But I got it together in my 30s, right? I kind of fit right around the age Jon is now, right around like 28, 29, it began to dawn on me like there's some things I can do that can fix my life. And I sort of got into them. But we'll see if Jon does. Maybe he won't. I don't know, man. I'm not his big brother anymore. Oof, that's a long-ass question. Let's go ahead and go to, here's a quick one. MMA Media Union. You hinted saying stay tuned when asked about an MMA Media Union on your live chat a while back. Any updates to this? I wish there were, but I'm afraid there isn't. Can MMA Media not get together like Steve Cofield said? They can. MMA media often say fighters need to stand together, yet they themselves can't unite to form a union on their own. Heretofore, that has certainly been the case. All right, let's go to the questions here on Twitter, on the Twitter machine. Do you still talk to Craig Carton? I text him occasionally. As a matter of fact, so yeah, I do text him occasionally, and I know MMA fans have a very different opinion of him, but I owe a lot to Craig Carton. I owe quite a bit to him, and I have very nice things to say about him. So, but I can understand if you don't. I'm not mad at it. All right. People judging Jon Jones would have been dead already if they had his money in their 20s. Probably some truth to that as well. Any word on Miles' jury? I reached out to him a couple of weeks ago and never heard back, so I don't know what the answer to that is. Thoughts on Korean Zombie return? Can't wait. I don't know if they're going to sell out as that as their main event, but Korean Superboy versus Cub Swanson prediction. I like the Korean Superboy. Top 3 worst movies. Come on, guys. Why doesn't the UFC market their black fighters to the urban markets? That's why UFC 201 wasn't bigger. That's been a common argument. That's a common argument and a common complaint. I generally don't think they're very good at African-American outreach. I'm not sure what the answer for that is. If it's an internal issue, if it's a strategic issue, if it's a willingness among the people who hold the keys to that kingdom not being interested, it's not altogether clear to me what the answer there is. They haven't found, to my knowledge, and if I've got this wrong, by all means correct me. To my knowledge, there hasn't been an African-American fighter who has, in UFC, who has captured that audience in like the same way that a Floyd Mayweather has, or even like in his prime, like a Zab Judah has. There just hasn't been that guy. And I don't quite know what the answer to that is. I've got some theories, but they're all pretty cockamamie. Quote, she can just cut some muscle, talking about Cyborg, is the yellow mustard of things MMA fans can say. Yes, it is. By the way, did you see who endorsed my yellow mustard irrational rantings? Pete Rubish, American powerlifter, who did 720 on a pause squat at only 240 pounds. There you go. That's who's backing me up. Who's backing you up, yellow mustard eaters? Nobody. Oh, Steve Martin. Steve Martin's backing you up. Enjoy that. I got Pete Rubish. I win. Would you ever be interested in building your own studio? Your YouTube page is aching for more content. Yeah, I'm working on it every day. This is my upstairs. You can't see it, but I'm slowly building something. How fast it's going to go, I don't know. Oh, and by the way, I know Jeremy Botter thinks this is all some Pizzagate ruse. Found a seller for the T-shirt. I worked that out. I'm telling you, it's coming. Like, super soon. With the UFC keen to recoup money from the $4 billion sale, is there a fear they will take more from Invicta? No, they need Invicta. Invicta is only around, well, I won't say only around. It's largely around because the UFC needs organizations like that to develop women and prospects and fighters. They're frankly essential. Many Norwegian are looking forward to Emil Valhalla, Emil Meek, debut at UFC 206. Do you have any prediction? Yeah, he's taking on Jordan Meehan. That's one of the fights I actually don't know who to pick on that one. That one could go either way. Really could. UFC preferred. That's a long question. If Aldo beats the winner of Max Pettis and goes up to 155 as he said he plans to, what are the odds on a Conor rematch? I don't know that I have a number, but I'd say good. I'd say good. Will you be in Toronto for UFC 206? No, I will not. And what do you think of the odds of Lando Venata taking performance of the night? High. What's worse, people booing Ryan Hall or Jon Jones' dick pill defense? Jon Jones' dick pill defense. I like the way Ryan Hall fights. I have no problem with it. However, and you might find this crazy since I police people eating yellow mustard, I actually don't mind if people don't like the way Ryan Hall fights. Like, it doesn't bother me. Like, if you watch it and you're like, this is not for me, okay, that's fine. I don't have an issue with that. That's like a perfectly reasonable thing to say. It's not something I agree with, but I'm not going to lose my mind over it or something. Like, you don't like it, okay, fair enough. I think that the answer is, number one, if he was just flopping to the ground and that's all he was doing, well, Gray Maynard would have followed him and pounded on him, but that's not what he was doing. He was changing the dynamic of the fight, and Gray Maynard had no answer for that. And then if he wasn't tuning, well, I mean, he wasn't like crushing him on the feet, but Ryan Hall got the better on the feet by a pretty wide margin. If that hadn't been the case, then I would be like, well, might be a different argument. But here's the fact of the matter. He did get the better of him on the feet, and Gray Maynard assiduously avoided the ground because he knew he was outmatched there, or at least he thought he was outmatched there. But even then, in the third round, like, you're losing, do something. And the fact of the matter is, guys like Ryan Hall who take advantage of the, they who have this sort of their own way of competing, you want to allow that. You want to allow wide latitude in how guys want to compete. Because on the one hand, it may create a guy like Ryan Hall who you may or may not like in terms of his style of competition. But on the other hand, it's going to create for some other kinds of sort of interesting or creative or different ways of exploring how to pursue a fight. And I think we want to allow for that. So that's why I don't feel like, if people don't like it, okay, that's fine. Okay. But being like, something should be done about it. What do you want me to do? Like, you want to have that creativity, that wide latitude, because that will ultimately foster a healthier environment and a more interesting environment in the ways in which fights are fought. And lastly, I would say, if you're really worried about it and he turns into like the next John Fitch where he's doing this to all the guys, there probably will be a consequence. If he loses once, maybe the UFC cuts him or something. Like, I'm not advocating for that, but like, what the fan base ultimately decides and likes and doesn't like has a pretty strong effect on what the UFC does and doesn't do. Johnny Hendricks did not have a good year. Yeah, let's look at Johnny Hendricks' year real quick, because you're right. He did not have an awesome year. Let's see. Old Johnny. Johnny Hendricks. Here is Johnny Hendricks' 2016. He lost to Stephen Thompson, and then he lost to Kelvin Gastelum. Yep, that's not a good one. That is definitely not a good one. Have you told Khabib his fight won't be for the belt? No, I don't have daily conversations with him. Faber had a pretty rough year. Let's look at his year. I'm looking to see someone who had like 3 losses. Let's see what Uriah had. Uriah Faber. Here's Uriah Faber's 2016. He lost to Dominic Cruz and then lost to Jimmy Rivera. Not the worst year ever. True or false? Dominic Cruz's trash talk is equal to McGregor. Just a tick underneath it. Was Dillashaw tricked signing a new contract? I have no idea. Who wins? Conor versus Floyd in a kickboxing match. Conor would just leg kick him to death. Would Ryan Hall's BJJ be an issue for Jose Aldo in MMA BJJ, or is Aldo's BJJ good enough to neutralize him? It depends what you mean. Aldo is really good at avoiding these kinds of entanglements too. Like, do you mean if he wanted to grapple with Ryan, like he thought he had a chance of beating him on the floor? No, I think Ryan is much better. But, especially in pure BJJ. But in MMA, Jose might have enough to neutralize it and then beat him up with ground and pound. You never know, right? So it depends what you mean. But like, when you think of jiu-jitsu and MMA, you have to think of what Demian Maia does, which is he forces you to compete on jiu-jitsu terms. He forces it on you. And of course, that's where he has the advantage. How are you going to force Jose Aldo to grapple with you if he doesn't want to grapple with you? He's a master at takedown defense and avoiding entanglements. Let's keep that in mind. Where is there any legitimate criticism of his dominant performance against a dangerous opponent? Who are you talking about? Oh, Hall dominated every round against Maynard, landed multiple head kicks in all rounds, had Maynard scared. He was not, well, scared is a strong word. Where is there any legitimate criticism of his dominant performance against a dangerous opponent? I think I would point you in the direction of Jonathan Snowden. Again, I don't agree with his assessment, but he has been pretty vocal about not liking it and thinking it's bad for MMA. So And I think he is entitled to have that opinion. Thoughts on Nick Diaz versus Gamebred for his first fight back? Love it. Love it. Who's the biggest tool in MMA? Oh, there are a number of choices to pick from there, boy. Let's see. On the Fight Companion, Brendan Schaub told Joe Rogan he is a member of Double MMAAA and they have 200 plus UFC fighters. I have not heard that, but that may be in fact true. It's funny that Dana White uses the UFC podcast to spew UFC propaganda with no media asking real questions. Well, that's been the case for a while. Like when he goes on ESPN, they kind of ask him tough questions, but not really. And when he goes on Colin Cowherd, they don't ask him any tough questions. He doesn't go on, maybe Landsberg does, Michael Landsberg, but he doesn't typically go on places that do that anymore. But here's the truth. Like, I don't even mind that he is out there promoting the brand's interests. That doesn't bother me at all. Oh, I shouldn't say it all. But in theory, it doesn't bother me much. I think the only thing is now people are sort of wise to what it is, and there should be a formal response to it that doesn't involve the media. Like for a long time, we were both acting as his conduit and the people who had to like criticize him for it, rather than there being other forces out there in a formal sense. In other words, if Roger Goodell does something, you can imagine the NFLPA is going to say something about it forcefully, and then the media can sort of weigh in on that. That really is where the battle should be had. It shouldn't be media versus Double MMAAA, media versus Dana White. It should be those other parties, and then the media observing it and weighing in on it, of course, as well. But it's not our job to promote UFC. It's not our job to be anti-UFC. It's not our job to promote a fighters union. It's not our job to be anti-fighters union. But we kind of get put in these roles because of the vacuum created from a lack of the sort of thinned out, frankly, non-existent organizational structure that MMA is built on. Luke, did you see Chisora? I'm assuming this is Derek Chisora throwing a table at an opponent at a presser. Did not. With the talk of a women's featherweight division, what is the possibility of a women's flyweight division? Well, there already is one in Bellator. You should watch it. It's good. Did the UFC sell as high as it did partially because of the way in which they pay fighters? And he put partially in all caps. Probably. And everyone talks about like, man, they're worth $4.2 billion. You see that? They've been warned about that loan not once but twice by regulators for it being a sketchy loan, to put it mildly, that is way too highly incorporating of debt. Maybe the internet means nothing, but I would keep your eye on that because they purchased something, an extraordinarily amount of high debt financing, and now they need to finance it. They need to pay that back, and that just requires some certain baseline numbers that have to be hit. That's semi-ish worrying some. Fantasy fight. Aldo versus RDA. Probably RDA. Aldo versus Barboza. These guys are just too big for him. Rumble versus Duffy. I would take Rumble. Mir versus Verdum. EBI rules. Verdum would have his way with him. Dude, Verdum is a multiple-time world champ. In the gi, without the gi. Verdum's level of jiu-jitsu is way above Frank Mir's. Way above. Sarah versus Woodley. Yellow Mustard asks, where does your hatred of me come from? Not having the palate of a toddler. Thoughts on Gio Martinez tapping Eddie Cummins out on Sunday? Yeah, I saw this. It was actually pretty well done. The EBI broadcast looked really good on Fight Pass. Good job by TJ DeSantis, by the way, who I think has really grown into that role. It looks to me like these guys are all pretty competitive. There was a bit of a honey hole defense where, if you guys don't watch a lot, this is going to be too esoteric, where Martinez just holds on to his own foot. And and there really was no answer for that. So this is to me like very innovative in the grappling context. But like I don't know how you can promote like this is like I don't know what 10th Planet's claim to fame is anymore, because they're definitely innovative in the grappling space. There's just no two ways about it. And their guys are getting better and better and better, and they're being more competitive with each passing year. Fair. Like Gio Martinez was at the last ADCC, and he did pretty well in the end, you know? But I don't know how that could possibly, I don't know what any of that has to do with MMA. What I thought the initial thing was like, let's create a guard playing system that works for MMA. And to some extent, that's true. But I don't see it as like, it still seems to me like traditional guard versus pass jiu-jitsu keenly applied works just fine for MMA. Some guys like Ben Saunders are really going to go after it. Guys like Tony Ferguson are really going to go after it, but these are fairly minimal. I don't quite understand what, like, if 10th Planet had to claim, like, what is better about their jiu-jitsu. Again, not like better, oh, we're better than Gracie Barra. I don't mean in that sense, but I mean, like, what is the value add that they offer? That's not quite clear to me. Doesn't say it's not good. It's obviously good, but I just don't quite understand certain things. Any early analysis on Grasso versus Herrig? I think Grasso is going to tear her up, but we'll see. Last thing, what is your Christmas Day meal? Bourbon. There you go. All right. I have to go. I appreciate everyone watching. If you have any questions, if I didn't get to anything, luke.thomas@sbnation.com. I really appreciate you guys watching. Tune in for the Luke Thomas Show, 4 p.m. today. I'm going to have a bunch of donks. I'm going to have Randy Couture in studio. I'm going to have Nate Quarry in studio, and Carlos Newton and a bunch of other guys. They're going to all be here in DC, so they're going to be in studio. So check that out, SiriusXM93. Give this video a like. Tell people about this podcast. Stay tuned for more stuff on MMA fighting. We're in Toronto. I think Chuck and Ariel are there, so it's the half of the A team. You guys are all set. I'll be back next week. Thank you guys so much for watching. Until then, stay frosty.